You're clean, aren't you? Except for your tower. You're a tower junkie, Roland.
Hello and welcome to Tower Junkies, presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. Tower Junkies is a podcast celebrating the work of Stephen King with an occasional focus on his magnum opus, the Dark Tower series. We discuss the themes, characters, and mythology of the series in Palaver episodes, and review the books and comic series in Kef episodes. We also discuss non-Tower King novels, TV and film adaptations of King's work, and the latest news about all things that serve the King. You can find more of our work at TowerJunkiesPod.com, and follow us on every level of social media at Tower Junkies Pod. I'm one of your hosts, Matt Hurt, and with me today, as usual, is Tiny.
Hello.
Hi, Tiny. How's it going?
Oh, it's going good, man. Going
good. Good. I'm really excited to talk. This is so dumb. I'm really excited to talk to you today on the podcast because I feel like when we podcasted together, we really mesh well. That is a callback to something that is not going to be recorded because I don't think I'm going to put that on the Patreon thing. But hey, if you want to support us on Patreon, you can do that at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer, where you get access to an exclusive RSS feed with content recorded specifically for Patreon supporters at the minimum rate of $1 per month. And by the time you're listening to this, we should probably also have a revamped reward tier thing there. So check that out, patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. Yes, so today on the podcast, Tiny, this is a very exciting episode because we are finally, at long last, finishing our review of the mammoth tome that is The Stand, Complete and Uncut Edition.
That we are,
by Stephen King.
Yep.
So Tiny, this is really exciting and everything. We're gonna share our thoughts on part 3. But before we do that, I can't remember if I mentioned this last time on the podcast, but as of right now, I think I did mention this. There's a new edition of The Stand that's coming out. Did I talk to you about this, Tiny?
No.
Okay. So BarnesandNoble.com has it available for pre-order right now. As of this recording, we're recording this in July. Who knows when it's going to air? So it's a pretty cool cover. It's kind of in the same vein as some of King's more recent like paperback editions. It's got like kind of an orange and yellow kind of sunset illustration with just a lone person standing on what looks like an island. And then it says Stephen King, The Stand. It's available in hardcover at bn.com, barnesandnoble.com. And apparently it's going to be released on September 8th, 2020. The hardcover is $25. Which is a little steep, but, you know, yeah.
Is there anything special about it other than, is it like supposed to be a companion for the miniseries? Or?
No, it doesn't look like a tie-in edition or anything. It just looks like just a new edition of it.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's pretty cool.
That's nice.
Yeah. Do you have any Stephen King check-ins? It's kind of nebulous since we're recording this in the past.
Yeah. I don't think I do.
Okay.
I'm not reading anything right now either.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, did you want to read Misery?
I do have that in my library.
Okay.
My audiobook library, so I would be down to read that.
Sweet. Okay. Yeah, and then, so by the time you're listening to this, we will have already reviewed Misery and the movie. Yeah, but we also need to do The Outsider and Revival. We have so much stuff, Tiny.
We do.
Like, it's getting to the point where I'm starting to get, like, a little anxious about it.
I know.
But yeah, we do it all for you guys. Our
It's
lives
all
for you. Yeah. Which brings us to our episode. So, Tiny.
Yeah.
Book 3 of The Stand.
Mm-hmm.
It's Book 3, The Stand, September 7th to January 10th. Tiny, this section of the book comprises of, about 5 hours worth of audiobook.
Yeah.
It's a very short section, but it is something that I think I mentioned this on our last episode, that I was curious how it was going to read to me this time around, because I always get the impression, or my memory of The Stand is that the the good stuff is in the second section.
Yes.
Which is also kind of the more dry stuff and toiling stuff. But that's where the character development really like pumps into gear and everything. And I think I mentioned last time on the podcast when we reviewed book 2 that I was just curious how it was going to end up in terms of how I felt about it.
Yeah.
Going into book 3, by the way, we're going to be spoiling the entire novel of The Stand, so fair warning. So, Tiny, going into book 3, what were your expectations and how did you feel going into it?
I kind of had big expectations because this will be I think this is going to be this is my 4th read through of The Stand. And first time with audiobook, but I feel like kind of what you were just saying, like I feel like book 3 is sort of it's a little elusive for me. Like honestly, I had trouble remembering like the actual climax of the conflict and stuff that because it's not that it's even uneventful. Like it's the opposite.
Right.
It just feels like all of the stuff that there is to love about this story comes well before it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like you were just saying, like book 2, I feel like that's where all the joy of the book is. And that's where, you know, I don't know, that just seems to be the part that I always latched onto the most. And I really wanted to change that with this read through because I feel like I've never given the ending a fair shake, or it's never stuck with me before.
Me too.
I mean, I had trouble remembering it. Like, oh, what happens here? What happens to this character? What does he do? What's that? You know, and that's kind of how I was going through this. And I am happy to report that this is my favorite read through of book 3 because I enjoyed it a lot more than I had in the past.
Yeah, same here, honestly.
Maybe it's because we're older now. The last time I read this, I was like, it was probably 10 years ago. Maybe not. Probably 10 years ago. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. We're more wise now.
Maybe. I read it kind of in the background, like listening to the audiobook, I think last year or the year before.
Okay.
So it was kind of fresh in my mind, but it was a more passive listening experience than like I wasn't like listening to it and taking notes like I did this time around. But I do think, and we'll maybe set aside, or maybe we can dive into it now, but I kind of wonder how much of that is due to the current world we're in right now.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's true.
So we're recording this July 21st, and COVID-19 is still raging throughout the country. Not the world, necessarily, the country. Because people don't want to wear masks and they're fucking idiots. But anyway.
Yeah.
It's just... Anyway. So, we have had several spikes in cases and everything. And it's just like, for me, not to get into a COVID-19 thing, but like for me right now, July 21st, I feel like it's this despair that I feel like all of this stuff is going on, and I feel like there is just a complete lack of leadership.
Yes.
And like today, Trump started the COVID-19 press briefings again, where he, like, people are celebrating it as more somber and everything and more, I don't know, I don't buy it. But anyway, that's in the past, you know, the world has changed by the time you listen to this, I'm sure. So anyway, I have this feeling of despair about the world we're in. And like, it's not so much like a I'm trapped at home kind of thing. Cause like things have opened up and we can do, like, I don't really do anything anyway, but like there's a little bit more wiggle room in terms of what we can do as long as we're, you know, careful and everything. But it's just feels like there's a lack of leadership and everything. So reading The Stand now in the era of COVID-19 is really unique. And this section of the book really resonated or really, hit a couple of notes in my soul as it related to my despair or my anxiety over the current pandemic. So we'll talk in more detail as we go on, but yeah, I thought this was a really unique reading experience given the time that we're living right now.
For sure.
Yeah. So this section of the book doesn't have a lot to it necessarily compared to the other two. So it opens up with us finally getting into Randall Flagg's camp and his whole side of this battle between good and evil. How did you feel about that perspective change? And do you think that Stephen King paid that off well?
Yeah, I think one of the best things about it is I think it did pay off, and one of the reasons why is the fact that most of the characters, including Lloyd Henreid, who's supposed to be the right-hand man, they're very, very human people. And there's not, what I mean by that is they're not evil. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
It's this whole battle, if you will, and this conflict has been poised as a good versus evil, and it is for sure. But it's kind of one of those things it's like you have to put everything in perspective, right? And it's sort of like when you look at World War II, a lot of those German soldiers were just soldiers, just fighting in a war. They didn't, there was no, a lot of them weren't even necessarily part of the Nazi party. They were just
following orders,
dutiful soldiers, right?
Yeah.
They didn't care about Jewish people or Hitler's final solution. They didn't even know about it. They didn't care about it. They were just trying to fight for their country, right? And that's a hard perspective to come to, knowing what we know now, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to compare Lloyd Henreid to Nazis.
Right.
It's sort of, a lot of people say you should never compare anything to the Nazis because it just gets lost, and it's too evil to comprehend. But
unless you're comparing the government mandating that we wear masks to Nazism.
Well, duh. Yeah.
Just
not my America.
Anyway.
But anyways, that's one of the best things about it is so many of the characters from the Bad Zone. It's never called anything, is it? From Vegas?
No, just Vegas.
Because the Free Zone is the good side,
right?
They're just people, and they don't necessarily have an agenda. It's sort of. I think for them, it's posed as more of an us versus them, as opposed to a good versus evil type thing, which is much more relatable and human.
Yeah.
Whereas, Randall Flagg is this subhuman or just this truly a force of evil, the devil, whatever you want to call him. He's just evil incarnate. And the people that follow him are such a pretty significant contrast.
Yeah.
Of that. And I think that's the best thing about book 3 is it really brings that to the forefront. And there's some of it in the other books too, like the whole crucifixion thing.
Yeah.
I think that sets the stage for all of that. But it's really made whole in the third book.
I agree. And I will say that I feel like the crucifixion stuff in book 2 feels like it is setting the stage for The Stand, which is this ultimate battle of good versus evil and everything, and it sets it up as, granted, the crucifixion stuff does, I think in book 2 it comes from a perspective of the people that are doing it are not really on board with it per se, but it kind of gets the, I don't know. I think going into it, the thing that struck me about book 3 was the way that, like you said, a lot of the characters that are on the evil side or that are on Flagg's side aren't pure evil characters. They're not vessels for Randall Flagg's evil to infiltrate and everything. And that's one of the things that I'm jumping ahead a little bit in my notes, but we'll be as thorough as we can. One of the things that struck me this time around is how it is so evident that the Flagg side, that the Vegas side, the quote-unquote evil side of this good versus evil battle is born from fear. It's more fear-based, even at the Randall Flagg level.
That's true.
Because one of our only scenes in the book where we are where we're in Randall Flagg's perspective, and we're seeing his inner monologue and stuff, is when he is kind of going away on his own, and he's trying to figure out like what's going on, and he's trying to like figure out like who the spy is or who the third spy is, and he's doubting himself and like why he doesn't have the power that he used to have and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was so telling, and I think that brings, on one hand, it brings the entire novel, all three parts, home into just one really fine package of a story about what happens. Like, it's not so much a story of good versus evil. It's good being born out of a pull to fight evil, which is born out of fear. Like, there are characters, like you said, that are on the Vega side or on Flag side, that they are wavering in their commitment to it. So there's Whitney, who at the end, like, is like, he is in the crowd and he's yelling at Flag and yelling to appeal to everyone, to, you know, come to the light and like see like what they're doing is wrong or whatever. And then another character that I kind of had notes on was Dorgan, I think.
Yeah.
The cop, who we'll talk more, because we'll probably, I think I'll want to go beat for beat for each of the characters. But Dorgan is an interesting character because he is someone who clearly is not a terrible person. He's not an evil person. He's an understanding person, but he also understands that he had a choice and he chose the wrong side. And we'll talk about that when we talk more about Glenn. Or I guess Stu, I think. I don't know. We'll talk more as we go on. But yeah, I just think that that's a really interesting way to kind of reveal the evil within the add complexity to the quote unquote evil side of the good versus evil thing. So yeah, so anyway, I just really like the complexity of the evil side, and it's not the black and white good versus evil story that we were led to believe it would be. It's more complex than that. I really dug it for that.
Yeah, I mean, especially with Lloyd, by the end, he's like a bumbling mess.
Yeah.
And I think that's truly indicative, because especially in I think it's book 1, he's like horrific. The stuff that he participates in with Poke is pretty horrific and awful and just plain evil, really. But I think he was just kind of along for the ride. You know, I don't think you can really excuse it, but it's like he was so horrible in book 1, and then by the end of the book, you're empathizing with him.
Yeah, and his complicity, his felicity, his complicity in the acts of evil that he finds himself in, is more just like he's a follower. He's someone who is just kind of following the lead. Like Poke, was a murdering sociopath, and he's just following the lead. And then, I don't know, the rat was trying to eat the cellmate or the guy in the next cell, so he thought maybe he would do it, so he was following the lead. But no, on a more realistic one is that Flag gave him the key, so he's following Flag. One of the things, and I tweeted this because I was so excited when we got to this part, Glenn Bateman, like, I promise we will circle back and go kind of chronologically, but Glenn Bateman talking to him in that calm way is just like the best. It's the best iteration of like the good coming up against the evil. Yeah. In this book. And I love it for that. And I love Glenn Bateman so much.
Me too.
But let's go back and let's talk about the spies. So the book 3 opens up with Judge Ferris being eventually murdered by Flag's men. And it's brutal. It's brutal. And I kind of love it for that. Yeah. It establishes the stakes, and it introduces us to Flag's camp pretty well. And, it just shows just how overpowered Flag is. And I think that that's one of the interesting things, because like he's, you know, he's in a crow's brain, and he's watching Judge Ferris in the motel room and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And like, it's just showing him that he can be anywhere, he can see anything, and his power is vast and everything. And it's like, and the last we've heard from the Boulder Free Zone is they just sent 4 dudes walking from Colorado to Vegas, barefoot, like on foot and everything. And it's just like this. It's such an uneven kind of thing, and I just love that. And then immediately after that, we get caught up with Dana Jurgens, who's the other spy, who she's sleeping with Lloyd, and there we get Lloyd's descriptions of Flag's like powers and evil.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he talks about how Flag just murdered some dude, and it's just so gruesome and everything. So how'd you feel about Dana Jurgens? And we'll talk about her death in a bit, but her and Judge Ferris as an introduction to book 3 and how it relates to the evil side of the book.
Yeah, it was definitely a good place to start. One sort of theme that I think is prevalent, especially with the Judge, is that, like you said a minute ago, most of the followers of Flag are there out of fear.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's the way things start to fall apart for the followers of Randall Flagg exemplifies the idea that love is a much better motivator than fear.
Yeah. Because
things just start to go to shit. Because like those guys who were all watching out for Judge Ferris are really just going through the motions, and they're not into it at all. I don't think they really wanted to kill the guy. I don't know. I think it was just. I think it sort of started to show that that theme, or that started to play out, and of course culminates in the final conflict. But yeah, one other thing that I loved about Judge Ferris is that final scene where he gets killed is. Stephen King is very good, not just in this book, but in others, about writing about and describing guns and gunplay, fighting, gunfights. He's just really great at it. There's a scene, if you will, in, I think it's Drawing of the Three, where there's a shootout at like a mob bar.
Yeah.
And there's some guy using like a fully automatic, like a machine gun or something, like an M60 or something like that. And it made me think of that. And then this comes to mind, where the two guys get into a bit of a shootout with Judge Ferris. And then just the general writing about Roland's, guns throughout the Dark Tower, throughout the whole series. Just the descriptors of them. And one thing I like that he does is most writers and stuff kind of use guns as a tool. They're not really they're not very descriptive devices. They're just there, and they're used to kill people. The drama is in what the gun does and what happens as a result of using the gun, not using the gun itself. Whereas Stephen King makes talking about the gun roaring, and how like he loved to talk about 45s, and 45s are like miniature cannons, and the recoil, and like how like half of the judge's head disappears, and it's all just so graphic. And I think it's important as a proponent of firearms to demonstrate and talk about how powerful and destructive they are, because in Hollywood they're fun and they're cool and all that, and you see movies like John Wick, and you're like, oh, that's badass. And like, yeah, it is, but it's like, don't forget that they're just, people sort of tend to forget that guns are so destructive, really. Yeah. I mean, they're, we talk about it all the time, but I don't know, that's just something that I've always appreciated about his writing, is how descriptive he is with gunfire, frankly.
In other words,
that was a gun nut tangent for me to go off on, I guess. But I feel like my heart was in the right place.
Oh, totally. I was just going to say, in other words, people don't kill people, guns kill people.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, I agree. That scene with Judge Ferris, his death is just it's a spurt of violence that is so kind of rewarding in a weird way. I mean, you're sad to see him die, and it sets the stage for, the final few chapters of the book in a really, intense way. But I mean, coming off of the second, the middle portion of the entire book being kind of dry and building toward, an explosion and everything, right into this just action, kill of a character is really just, it keeps that momentum in a really satisfying way.
Yeah. And with Dana, I really just like how good of a spy she is.
Me too.
She's so good, she's literally sleeping with the right-hand guy.
Yeah.
She basically climbed as high as she could. I mean, and unfortunately, things go south for her. It's sad, but I think at the same time, she's, okay with it. Yeah. Because she's pretty badass.
Totally. Her confrontation with Flag is one of my favorite parts of the entire novel, and that's mostly because this is really one of the first, if not the absolute first, time that our side, the good side, is directly talking to Randall Flagg. It is the first time that this character is being shown to us in all of his persuasive and evil glory from the perspective of the Boulder Free Zone. And it's a really satisfying interaction between them, because Dana just keeps her wits about her. She is she notices that he's trying to glamour her and everything and trying to brainwash her or whatever, but she's keeps her faculties about her. And the way that she goes out, she kills herself, is after attempting to kill him, is just so so badass.
Yes.
Like you said, it's such a badass spy way to go out.
Yeah.
I really loved it.
Right.
Yeah.
And both of those characters, Ferris and Dana, again, to kind of go back to the theme of, they were motivated by love and friendship and stuff like that, and to the point where they're willing to sacrifice their lives. Whereas, really, the only character on Randall Flagg's side that's willing to do that is Trash Can Man. Yeah, and he kind of flips the script in the end. But
that really blew up in his face
a little bit. Boy, is there nuclear material on his face.
Nice. Yeah, I agree, and I think that's where a lot of Stephen King's influence, the influence from Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings, comes into play in this story.
Yeah.
You can really see the Fellowship of the Ring and the Fellowship aspect of Lord of the Rings at play in the dynamics that he sets up with these characters. And we'll talk more about that with the pilgrimage that the four men go on. But I love it. I think it's such an interesting meld of something that is very much I don't want to say expected, but it's kind of like we said, the spy kind of thing, the spy way to go out of Dana confronting the boogeyman of the book.
Right.
But it is so just unique to Stephen King in such a unique way. And I love it.
Yep.
So then after that, we get Harold.
Yeah.
And I love the way that we're just brought into, it's oh, Harold's laying in a ditch, he's dying.
Yeah.
It's we have to play catch up, or Stephen King plays catch up with us.
Right.
Yeah. And so how did you feel about Harold's whole demise?
Again, in the end, I feel like so many of these characters who have done horrible things, we empathize with them, and they're at the very end. And Harold falls into that category. That's just such an awful way to go out. You're literally abandoned at the bottom of a ravine with a broken leg. That's just that's torturous. But he had it coming. I'm not saying he didn't have it coming, but and I think just his path is just so tragic. He's a weirdo goofball. And he, I think I mentioned it in one of the previous episodes we recorded that you sort of empathize with Harold early on, because I feel like all of us, when we were in our teens, had that girl we were infatuated with. Right. As a former teenage boy, we all had that crush, or we had crushes or whatever, infatuations with different girls. And he had this situation present itself where he and that girl were the only two people left in his town, and he sees it as this amazing thing, and then it gets ripped away from him. You know, it's not excusable what he did and how he reacted to that being ripped away from him, but it's, again, you sort of empathize with his feelings, you know. He had no right to kill anyone and do what he did, but it's like, you can understand how that event tormented him to the point where he got to where he got. You can see the path, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
You know, and it's really interesting. I've thought about like your read of Harold, and I think it's really interesting because I don't necessarily empathize with him that much.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, and I get like that approach, or I get that analysis. Like I agree that it's an interesting way. Like, I mean, he's infatuated with this girl. He's the last person on earth with this girl, and it's taken away and everything. But I think from the outset with Harold, I was just so turned off by his possessive nature and the way, like, his ownership of, like, the presumption that he staked his claim on this woman, and everything. It's just like this entitlement that I think is one of the more fascinating kind of character arcs, especially considering, like, now with the rise of the internet and incels and everything. Like, it's the prototype of that and everything.
Definitely.
And I think I don't know, I just don't have a lot of sympathy for Harold. However, I will say that when we're with him in the ravine, when he's dying, or he's, like, it's game over for him and everything, I did sympathize with him, but more from a like confused kid perspective. Like, I don't know, like, he was arrogant, he was a dick, he was murderous, like, he was evil to an extent, but, like, he always said that he did it of his own free will. And I can't remember exactly what he wrote and everything, but I feel like he stood by that for the most part. And I think that that's a telling read of the character, that he says, like, oh, I did this of my own free will. This was my, like, I made a mistake and everything and all that. But he didn't really do it of his own free will. Like, maybe he did, but it was more that influence from the dark side. Yeah. That kind of, it wasn't a controlling effect, but, like, he made the choice to do that, but it's still, like, his prized possession is his mind that he thinks is better than everyone else's, when it's really like, no, he was just a pawn in this evil person's evil thing's big plan. Right. And he can't reconcile that. So I don't know. I think it's a really fascinating character, that I don't really empathize with that much.
That's fine. Yeah, that's true. I don't disagree with any of that. Yeah. I guess that's just how I felt. Yeah.
To each their own.
Ignore that box I brought in here and dropped in the corner, by the way.
Oh, okay, cool. I was wondering about the ticking and everything. So there's a walkie-talkie connected to it. I'll make sure to mute it so that when
because we're recording right now. So. Yeah.
And then when you say something, it'll just fall on deaf ears. Still love that so much. Yeah. So Harold ends up killing himself. Yeah, and then Nadine. Let's talk about Nadine. We'll jump around a little bit. Nadine meets Flag and goes to Flag, and again, like, this section of the book, I got so much more out of it this time than I think I ever have in any of my reads of the book. Okay. Because her meeting with Flag, and maybe and I don't want to dive into this whole thing because it's not what the show's about really, but I kind of feel like I just connected with this section of the book more because of the way that the evil side, the bad side of the book, the evildoers and everything, are painted as character. Like, this entire section of the book is less about the big confrontation between good and evil, and it's more about how the evil side is unraveling. And it's like a Wizard of Oz effect, where we're seeing the man behind the curtain because everything is falling apart, because he's not sustaining the side through just fear. and everything. Like, people are slowly waking up to it, or they're aware of it, but they're just kind of following orders, to use your, like, Nazi metaphor.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting, the points where we see it unravel. Like, when Nadine meets with Flag and, like, he rapes her and everything, and, like, the description is just...
That's really horrific.
That's the exact word I was going to use.
Yeah.
It's horrific. Talk about a character that doesn't really deserve empathy, but I do empathize with, is Nadine, in that she's been waiting her whole life for this moment and everything. And it's just like, she immediately, like, realizes, like, this is not what she signed up for. This is something else entirely. And the way King writes that scene is just heartbreaking and horrifying, and it paints what little we have of Nadine after that in such a catatonic and just dazed light that just brings an entirely new level of remorse for the character and empathy and just pain. And then she dies off page. Like,
right.
It's just kind of a throwaway line. And I think that shows that Flag didn't give a shit. Like,
right.
It's just so amazing.
Yeah. I had sort of forgotten about her. I couldn't really remember what happened to her.
Me neither.
I think it's because literally her final scene is very, underplayed. Like you said, but yeah, talk about tragic. I feel like she was so like trapped in her situation. I feel like she was kind of being shunned away in the free zone. It was of her own doing. I think she had kind of, she had kind of towed the line and tiptoed over the, good side versus bad side. For a while to kind of see how things played out. And she's a bit of an Aaron Burr, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I think, the fact that she had a path, or she had a way to redemption, and it just ended up not working out for her. And she felt like the only way she could go was towards Flag.
Yeah.
And that's really sad. And just the fact that she just had such a horrible last few days. And I mean, Harold treated her like crap too.
Yeah.
He treated her like shit and didn't treat her right. And I mean, she had to, like, her little scooter broke down like pretty far away from Vegas, and she had to, like, stumble into Vegas, and she just had this terrible journey, and then she gets raped, and then she's a shell of a person, and basically just kills herself.
Yep.
Jumps off the side of a building. And
I was gonna say, she didn't, when she was kind of toying with whether to be good or bad or whatever in Boulder, she wasn't willing to wait for it.
No, not so much.
Aaron Burr. But anyway, but yeah, like, I agree. Yeah, it's heartbreaking. It's horrifying and everything. And that kind of, if I remember correctly, because it's been a while since we covered book 2, but if I remember correctly, the point that brought her, the thing that pushed her over into the dark side of everything was Flag telling her that they know about, like, they're onto her and everything, and that's why they needed to go
right
and accelerate their plans and everything. So it's one of those things that, like, I don't know, she could have made the right choice, but she didn't, and she just had a very horrible end, and it's really horrific.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and so before the meeting, before she meets him, we get one of our only scenes. Like, it's one of the first and only times that we get Flag's complete point of view. Like, it's when he's alone. He's, like, we talked about it before, but it's really fascinating because it's him filled with doubt. And that's one of the things that I found really fascinating about this section of the book. Again, to kind of call back to that Wizard of Oz comparison, the entire man behind the curtain effect, where you can't sustain this evil based on fear. It's just really interesting because, like, I kind of equated it to the world we're in now. Like, people are afraid of coronavirus, and they're afraid of the limitations that, the government's imposing and everything. And that fear causes people to do irrational, stupid things, like not wear a mask or take something like not really see things that clearly. They're looking for, they're looking for excuses or scapegoats, or they're looking for like insufficient data to back up their biases. Like, it's surreal. And like reading this book now, while people are talking about how, oh, if you wear a mask, you're limiting your oxygen consumption, and you're like, it's more harmful to wear a mask than not, which is like patently bullshit, complete, like inaccurate and everything. And then like people, like, as of this recording, they announced that when they have the Indy 500 here in Speedway, they're going to have 25% capacity and masks are going to be required. And like, I've talked about this on other podcasts and everything, but like one of the simple joys I have in my life is when I see those news articles on Facebook, I'll go to the comments and find like the idiots that are trying to spread like misinformation or just having completely terrible takes on it and block them from Facebook. Just a little, I don't know, a little nice thing that I get to do is like they're silenced. I never have to see them again.
Yeah.
But anyway, like I saw people saying like, so if it's 25% capacity, why do we need masks and everything? It's like, okay. So, well, if it's only a minor infection, why do you need antibiotics? Or
right.
Why, if you have a lock on your door, why do you need an alarm? Why just, oh my God. Yeah. Anyway, so what was I saying? But anyway, so fear, like evil based in fear, doesn't work in the book, and I related to that. So yeah, I just love that kind of, that dichotomy of, or that dynamic of fear running the evil side and just faltering completely because it's not sustainable.
Right.
So yeah. Okay. Did you have anything on that?
No, I think I said my piece on that, actually.
Okay, cool. So let's get away from the demon rape again.
Yeah.
Sad to say, not the last time we'll be covering that on this podcast.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Anyway, so then we get Tom Cullen. My God, like his arc throughout this entire book is just incredible. But here, one of our first scenes with him is he is making his return journey to Boulder. And there's something that he says, or that he thinks in his mind, that I think is a perfect summation of kind of the dynamic of good versus evil as depicted in this book. So Tom Cullen, as he's traveling, I think it might be when he's still in Vegas, I'm not sure. But anyway, he's thinking about the differences between Boulder and Vegas, and he says that there's love in Boulder but no love in Vegas because there's so much fear in Vegas that everyone is too busy being scared to love. And I just love how succinct that is, and it's such a complex analysis that's through the prism of the mind of a mentally challenged character.
Right.
And it's incredible that like, I love that King selected that character to give us that summation of the differences between the two factions in this book, because he's like, he cuts to the simplest way to communicate a complex idea, and I love it for that.
Yeah, it's so simple that even Tom Cullen can pick it out.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, but it's one of the most important and dynamic parts of the human condition, if you will, but it's boiled down so succinctly, like you said. That is really kind of beautiful. And I feel like, maybe some people would be critical for him having a mentally handicapped character. And the word retard and retarded is thrown around quite a bit. But I don't know that it's necessarily used in a derogatory way. Like that's not a term we use anymore.
Right.
But at the time, people would say, oh, that he's mentally retarded. They would say that, even though now that's not politically correct.
Right.
So I think maybe people might read this book and see this character and some of the language used and would say that it's unsensitive or it's, whatever. They'd criticize it for that, but I can see past that, I guess, and put it into the proper context, and again, what, like you were saying, what Stephen King achieves with the character is pretty monumental, and his arc throughout the book is just really incredible. I take no issue with any of it. And I love where he goes after this too. Like his whole, when he runs into Stu and everything.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Not to jump ahead.
Right. But before we get to that, let's talk about Trash Can Man.
Yeah.
He has this growing psychosis through this book that is really great. I don't remember necessarily the exact context, but I think it's when he's kind of off on his little, when he's finding the A-bomb.
Mm-hmm.
He's having these visions of all the tormentors from his childhood. And Tiny, I don't think you've read this short story or seen the movie, but it reminded me a lot of Sometimes They Come Back. Have you seen that movie?
No.
Okay. So the story, basically it's a short story from Night Shift. The story is about a high school teacher, surprise, who has a traumatic event in his past when he was a child. And in his classroom, new students start, like each day a new student is transferred into his class, and it is one of the people who was responsible for the traumatic event as a child, and it's just an increasingly depiction of tormented memories and everything. But it just reminded me of that. I thought that was really an interesting parallel to draw.
Okay.
But in this book, Trash Can Man having that kind of psychotic break is just really, really strong. I really loved it as kind of a bit of kind of literal insanity in this section of the book that pays off pretty well.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, it's... Yeah, I'm not sure what else you can say about it.
Right, yeah, me neither.
It is pretty... And it's kind of... It's also has its elements of tragedy to it as well.
Yeah.
I think. Because, like, nothing good ever happened to Trash Can Man.
Right.
Until he got to Las Vegas. And he was accepted for the first time. Mm-hmm. So... And then it's unfortunate that turns into his psychosis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also his growing psychosis and insanity is something that triggers, people in the Flag camp to think like, okay, well, we need to get rid of Trash Can Man. Like Flag orders a hit on Trash Can Man, essentially.
Right.
But that kind of blows up in his face. So let's stop dilly-dallying and let's talk about the four pilgrims that are making their way to Vegas. So we've got Stu. We've got, oh my God,
Glenn Bateman.
Stu, Larry, Glenn, and Ralph.
Ralph, yeah.
So, oh man. So first of all, I just love the camaraderie among the four of them.
Right.
It's so great, especially after spending so many, like a handful of chapters in Vegas with the evil faction and everything, going back to the people of the free zone, that they are on this pilgrimage is just so refreshing, and it's a great way to kind of balance out this section of the book. How did you feel about their journey, and then Stu's injury we can talk about?
Yeah, I remember when I first read the book, I was like really surprised and just kind of, I don't know, I kind of would have just been like, no, I'm not doing that. That's dumb. Like, why would I do that? I mean, we already sent the spies. They're they're collecting information for us. Mm-hmm. Let's let that play out first. I remember thinking that one of the first few times I read it. And I still feel that way to an extent, but I also understand how faith kind of drives things on the side of the free zone.
Yeah.
People, I understand that. And it was a good way to kind of raise the stakes in a way that makes sense. I think for the characters, it makes sense.
Yes.
And again, it made for some good drama.
Absolutely. And the whole faction, like the whole faith-based thing is just so just so involving. Like, you don't expect, let's talk about Stu's injury, because this is where it kind of really comes into play.
Yeah.
So Stu gets injured to the extent that they cannot save, like they have to follow the instructions that were laid out to them. Like, if someone were to fall, you have to go on. Like, nothing should stop you on your quest. And I really love Stu's injury that on the surface feels like it's a debilitating, like it feels like he's going to die. Like, this is his death.
Yeah. And
man, I think there's a certain poetry to that, in the way that this event, that Stu, which is a character that we followed from the beginning, that he's been like the kind of de facto leader of this pilgrimage.
Yeah.
He has fallen, and this is used as a means to strengthen the other three's resolve and actually like have a test of their faith in Mother Abigail and this quest that she's put them on, this supernatural thing. It's like them confronting this very out there supernatural higher power kind of calling that they've answered, and it's them having to be at a crossroads with it to think like, okay, well, we like, this is on the page, or like on paper, it's a really asinine thing. Like, they're traveling all this long way and everything on faith, and they don't have a single clue what's going to happen, what they're going to have to do. They say, like, they're aware that this is a death march. Like, they're on their way to their deaths.
Yeah.
And I love that their resolve and their commitment to that is tested in this moment. And like, this is a defining moment of the good side of the good versus evil battle. So yeah. So did any of that register with you? How did you feel about their decision to leave Stu behind?
Yeah, I mean, that was harsh. And I remember when, like, the first time I read it, I was like, man, I can't believe we're going to like kill off, Stu, you know, he's been our leading man throughout this whole thing. I was really blown away by it, but yeah, I guess I really do like the way it affects the other three, and kind of makes their journey even more real. Yeah. It was almost like, to compare it to Lord of the Rings, you know, like when Boromir when he dies.
Yeah, at the end of Fellowship.
The end of Fellowship. Yeah. Yeah, it was kind of like that. You know, I really like that really solidifies things and brings things together in that story, and this sort of has a similar effect.
Yeah, and it's just beautifully written drama as well. Because you really feel for these characters who very much care for one another, and they're all in this together, and it's just really impactful at a dramatic level. And I also, again, kind of the poetry of it all, I love the symmetry of Stu and Harold in this section. Yeah. So it's just so, like, there are parallels, but it's showing that they're two sides of the same coin, in that Harold has succumbed to the evil of it, and he ends up, like, he does not have a lifeline or anything. He does not have the resolve to push forward or anything. He's dead. Like, this is his end. He ends up killing himself and all that. And then Stu is in a similar position, but he has this resolve, and he has a savior in Tom Cullen and Kojak. Right. And it's just, I think it's a beautifully demonstrated symmetry between these two, or they're the antithesis of each other in a lot of ways. Right. I love the poetry of that, or yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that was an accident on Stephen King's part.
No. Nope. Yeah. So we get to kind of jump ahead. I have in my notes, chapter 73, The Pilgrims Arrive. And my God, I talked about Dorgan, the Vegas security guy who used to be a cop. I find him a really interesting character. Like Larry, and I also love that the kind of role of leader of this group is thrust onto Larry. It's a classic trope and everything. Maybe we'll talk about this after, but I got such, like, Lost vibes. Like, this is the part of the book where you really see how much it influenced the writing of Lost. Because I've said before that on the special features on the Blu-ray and everything, they said that, like, they had a copy of The Stand in the Lost writer's room. Yeah. At all times. But the thing that stood out to me with Dorgan and Larry was that Larry is talking to Dorgan as a person. He's on the side of good, Dorgan's on the side of evil, but he's talking to him as a human being, and he tells him that Mother Abigail sent them. And I love this kind of offhanded remark where Larry says that Dorgan probably dreamt of her, Mother Abigail. And what I love is Dorgan's response is that he denies it, but Stephen King writes it as Dorgan can't, he looks away from Larry. He cannot make eye contact. And I think that was just exquisite because it's showing everyone had a choice. And even if they it's not so much that there are evil people who will make the evil choice. It's that there are fearful people who will make the easy choice, which is to be on the evil side, that they think are overpowered and will win and everything. I love that kind of dynamic. So
yeah, I'm not sure I picked up on all that, honestly.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I remember that part. It's when they're driving back to Vegas, right?
Yes. Yeah. I think it's after, pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
It's when Dorgan puts Larry in the cell.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah. But, so it's understandable that you may not have picked up on it or anything, because right after that we get Glenn Bateman and Randall Flagg.
Mm-hmm.
Glenn Bateman is maybe my favorite character.
Yeah.
And I used to say that Nick Andros was, but I think Glenn Bateman has taken the cake. My God. And it's funny, I was listening to the Stand podcast from Jason Seacrest over at the Company of the Mad.
Mm-hmm.
And their second or third episode, they had talked about, it was the introduction of Glenn Bateman. And I think Mike Flanagan or someone on that podcast mentioned that they had talked to Stephen King, and Stephen King Anthony Bresnikan asked Stephen King when he was interviewing him for the Vanity Fair article of the CBS All Access miniseries. Stephen King had said that Glenn Bateman is a vessel for his own voice. He's Stephen King's avatar for the world. So that's why he is so he's so knowledgeable and so well spoken and everything, and he knows so much, is that he's basically Stephen King writing himself into the story.
Mm-hmm. But
what did you think of Glenn Bateman's confrontation with Flagg, and obviously Glenn Bateman's ultimate demise in that scene?
I think, again, there's so much to unpack there, but I think one of the more interesting parts of it is really how Lloyd Henry reacts during it.
Yeah.
He's so reluctant, and I feel like he doesn't want to be participating in this event, and the cracks really start to show for Lloyd, I think, right there. And I think that's when he starts to, not when he starts, but I think it's a significant moment in his inner conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And seeing that, or noticing that during this read through, was pretty significant for me.
Yeah.
In regards to his character, but all the meat is just how Glenn Bateman has such strong resolve.
Yes.
Throughout this, because he just does not give the Man in Black, does not give Randall Flagg an inch the whole time.
Yep. And
literally laughs at him. I mean,
absolutely. I love it so much, because between that, that's that's maybe the most important scene of the entire novel.
Mm-hmm.
And couple that with Larry's conversation with Dorgan, and then even to an extent Judge Ferris and Dana Jurgens. Every character from the good side in this section has, this is the stand. This is the titular stand of the novel.
Right.
Is these characters facing evil and the resolve that they have, and it all reaches its big crescendo. I know that we have, obviously, the big boom, the Hand of God section coming up, but this scene between Glenn Bateman and Flagg is almost the entire climax of the novel.
Yeah.
And to your point, like I love it. Like I have in my notes, I love Glenn Bateman so goddamn much. Because you're right. He laughs at him. Like he does everything in his power to disarm Flag and to just completely cut him down immediately. Like, his first line to Flag is something to the effect of, "You're not so much of a boogeyman as we made you out to be." And it's just, and I love how it intersperses between his dialogue and his inner thoughts, or his not inner thoughts, but like King goes to extra lengths to say like, "Oh, well, the temperature dropped down 10 degrees when Flag entered the room, and Glenn's arthritis flared up as Flag approached and everything." And then you have Glenn just being as strong as he can. Like he's not letting it show that his arthritis has flared up. He's not letting it show that he's not going to be intimidated at all. Mm-hmm. And what I love so much about it is that he knows what's coming. He knows that this is the end of his life, and he chooses to appeal to Lloyd, and he tries to like explain to him, but not in a pleading way. At no point in the scene does Glenn Bateman come across as pleading for his life or pleading for like trying to like add more time to his life or anything. He's just so matter of fact. He's saying that like, yeah, I know that this isn't what you want to do, Lloyd. Like, this is something that, it's like you have a choice. This is not something that you're completely, I don't know exactly what he says, but he basically is like, go ahead and shoot him. Like, shoot him. Like, you have a choice here. You can shoot him right now and end it all. Right. But I love it. And I love that it's not enough, but he still goes out a hero. I love it so much. This is my favorite part of the entire novel.
Yeah. It's one of my favorites too. Yeah. And it's funny, like you mentioned that Judge Ferris, Dana, and Glenn all die. And I think in the eyes of Randall Flagg and maybe in the thoughts of some of the readers, you see that as a loss, but it's really, I mean, it's a sacrifice, and what they're doing, what those three characters were doing, was through their deaths were knocking the wheels off the bus of the group in Vegas. They're taking the wind out of Randall Flagg's sails by dying, and so it's like you think they're losing, but they're actually succeeding. And like they have to die to do it, but that's the only way to do it. And it's one of those things where it's like you think death is a punishment or death is supposed to be avoided at all costs, whereas in this scenario it's actually a victory.
Yep.
On all three accounts, but I think it's obviously it is exemplified the best with Glenn Bateman at the end.
They're all making their stand, and I love it.
Yeah.
So then Larry gets his chance. Larry and Ralph, they are led to a public execution. Mm-hmm. And so this is where we get the big moment of the end of the book, essentially. A few different things happen, and it's interesting because this time around, like, going into it, this is what I really, and I think this is what a lot of people focus on in terms of the ending, is the big hand of God moment and the bomb going off and everything. Mm-hmm. And I think that in my mind, in terms of like in between all of the rereads and everything I've done of this book, I've just focused on that and felt underwhelmed by it. It feels like on the surface a Deus Ex Machina kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And this time around, I was floored. I was all for it. I loved it. I think it's brilliant. So basically, to kind of run down what happens is that there's a public execution that's about to take place of Larry and Ralph. Whitney comes into the picture and yells and trying to appeal to everyone, saying like, you're like trying to just say like, this is crazy. Everyone is acting crazy. Then Flagg murders him with a bolt of like blue flame, I think, that goes out into the crowd. And then as Trash Can Man arrives with the bomb, that flame, I love the imagery of this. The flame grows and flies up into the air and comes down in the form of a hand to set off the nuke. Mm-hmm. And and the righteous and unrighteous alike were consumed in that holy fire, which is one of my favorite lines of all of Stephen King's writing. So how did you feel about this, and how did you remember this? How did you feel about it in prior rereads, and how did you feel about it now?
I'm still not crazy about it.
Okay.
Frankly, I feel like the story would have been better served if Trash Can Man had literally and physically decided to detonate the bomb.
Oh, okay.
Once he came back to see what was left for him, or what that had turned into. I think that would have been the better conclusion, I guess. I'm just not big on the supernaturality of it, if that's a word. 'Cause I feel like obviously there's supernatural powers at play in this conflict, but I feel like the result of it is ultimately should be left up to who's gonna win. Like it should be left up to the efforts of good versus evil. Like God, quote unquote, should not interfere.
Interesting.
And I feel like that's what happened, and it's not bad. I just, like I said, like you said, and then I agree with, or this is the theme of the book, it's a theme in the book that Judge Ferris, Dana, and Glenn, and the other people who go to Vegas from the free zone are making their stand, and they make that sacrifice. They sacrifice their lives to demonstrate to those people how they have a choice. And Trash Can Man had a choice. And I think it would have been great if he had just made the right choice and just decided to detonate the bomb himself, or some variation of that.
I can definitely see your point, and I do agree with you that because it does muddy it a little bit. The hand of God, like it is literally an act of God that the entire group of like evil side of it was wiped out completely. And that is a little bit of a cutting the corners a little bit.
Deus Ex Machina, like you said. Yeah.
But I don't know. I just feel like it felt appropriate this time around because the fragility of the fragility of the dynamic between okay. So the two factions, the good side, the evil side, the free zone and Vegas. Vegas is corruption and it is evil and everything. It is blindly following this charismatic and persuasive and horrific demon of a creature. And I don't know how to articulate it, that like a literal hand of God coming down and like setting off the nuke is a reset button to an extent. And I feel like that is, I don't know, maybe I can rationalize it by saying that it feels like less of a God interfering in the battle of good versus evil, and more of a, okay, good wins, evil's gone, now let's go and have Stu and Tom go back to Boulder. It's like it just wipes out an entire side of the conflict and everything. I don't know. I just felt like it felt like a beautifully appropriate thing. Okay. Do you see it as an actual hand of God, or do you think that it's Flag's final thing that he does?
I see it as like an act of God.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, as opposed to like a happy accident or something that Flag caused it. Yeah, I think it's a literal act of God.
I think so too.
And in the to speak religiously, I guess, that's how it's supposed to be. They're supposed to be the good and evil are only supposed to influence all of us, right? To do whatever we do, right? The angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other, right? They're just whispering in your ear. That's what it's supposed to be. And then whatever transgressions take place is the result of choices being made.
Yeah.
That's how I prefer it to be. But I definitely, like I said, this read-through was my favorite read-through of the conclusion of this book.
Yeah.
And I definitely grew to appreciate book 3 more with this read-through.
Mm-hmm.
And I've sort of made peace with that, I guess, with the Hand of God ending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I just loved it this time around. I didn't really articulate it that well because I don't really have the words for it, but I just think that it's something about it just clicked with me, and it felt like an interesting reset of it that, yeah, evil is not going to win out, and this is the end. Yeah. So, to kind of wrap up a little bit, we have a very long denouement to this book.
Yeah.
Basically, it's the adventures of Stu and Tom Cullen.
Yes.
And we can kind of briefly run through it because we're running a little bit long.
Yeah.
So, what I love about it, I was so surprised when Tom came back because for some reason, I had forgotten about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the idea that Nick is like speaking to Tom from beyond the grave.
Yeah.
And helping him to get Stu back on his feet.
Totally.
And just the journey that Stu and Tom go through is so. It is it is such a strong, like, I don't know if I'm using this word right. A good like salve to put on the wound of the emotional journey that we went through.
Yeah.
Did I use that right?
You did, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Journey? No, but it's a good like just breather, and to kind of, this is the triumph of the book, is that these characters represent the good, and the entire journey back is them just loving each other and wanting to get back. And there's a little bit of that fear, like Stu has the dreams of Franny and like having a demon child and everything.
Mm-hmm.
But the little things, like Stu setting up these little surprises for Tom. And like, it's such a charming thing when
it's
like,
so sweet.
It's so sweet.
Yeah.
Like, I actually chuckled and did like an audible aw because when Stu was talking about like, oh, I got you a Christmas present. I think I heard Santa and everything. Yeah. And he's like, I know Tom Cullen knows Santa isn't real. And then like, even after that, he's like, yeah, I think I heard a sleigh last night. It's just like, it's so charming.
It is.
And I do want to mention that, I have in my notes, Stu's movie surprise for Tom hits different in the era of COVID-19.
Word.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what did you think of this whole denouement and their journey back to Boulder?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite parts of the book. It's just so sweet and so, like you said, their journey is very arduous. You know, they're battling nature. It's funny because the book is so much a good versus evil conflict, right? You go to those tent poles of literature, right? It's good versus evil, and it sort of morphs into this kind of man versus nature thing at the end.
Yeah,
and I always love those kinds of stories. And just the way that they care for each other, and the nice little surprises that Stu gives to Tom they're just sweet. That's the word that just comes to mind. It's so heartwarming and sweet, and it's such a warm, despite the fact that it's the dead of winter, it's such a warm feeling that it provides.
Absolutely.
That these guys they're so driven by their love for each other and their loved ones back home that they can overcome all these obstacles.
Absolutely.
And it's just, it's really such a great way to end the book. To me, it's more satisfying than the actual climax of the conflict.
Yeah, I can definitely get on board with that. And when they finally get back, just everything, it has this feeling of just conclusiveness. And it's such a great conclusion to this massive story, in that like we get resolution of like, okay, what's her name is pregnant, Larry's
Franny. Julie? No. Judy? No.
Joni,
Jerry?
Chachi.
Something with a J?
Yeah.
Might be a soft J.
Yeah.
Am I pronouncing it wrong?
Samsonite. I was way off. Knew it started with an S though. Anyway, two different movies. Anyway, so yeah, she has twins, and and like Franny's baby lives and everything. Like this, it's this hopeful thing that's born out of this new life and everything. And then we even get, like, it's not just completely 100% everything. It's like we get resolution, or we get the hint of resolution to the rebuilding of society, in that, like, they have that section where it's like, okay, well, you know, a drunk guy assaulted an officer, and now they're talking about having guns and everything.
Right.
And it's like they're like, slowly civilization is coming back, and we're left on that note. And we can kind of infer that from there. But
yeah,
it's beautiful.
It's sort of, I do kind of enjoy the little shift that Stu talks about or I think it's maybe when Franny's talking about, when they're talking about leaving and going back to Maine. Like they're talking about the way how society is starting to kind of go back to their old ways, and it's such a fun kind of little shift that it's shifted from a perspective of survival to a perspective of like wants and needs and growth. And it's they're sort of falling into these unfortunate tropes. Like there's like two clear guys who might be running for mayor or sheriff or something like that, and it's like, okay, we're starting to get into like party politics again, and we're talking about these very first world, to use a modern term, these very first world, not necessarily first world problems, but like, oh, should our cops start carrying guns now? Like, it's like, well, we're only worried about that. We're only thinking about that now because we're not worried about where our next meal is going to come from. And it's like things are starting to get quote unquote better. And it's just a fun little turn of the wheel there that, kind of gets away from these giant good versus evil themes or man versus nature themes that were driving the story for so long. It gets into the sociology of it again that Glenn Bateman touched on throughout the book.
Exactly.
It's just kind of a fun little gear, or a fun little wrench to throw in the gears at the end there. Yeah.
It's shifting away from the biblical stuff to the societal stuff, and
it's a little sad.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. But I don't know. I think it's really, this is a thought that I just had now, so it's not as polished as I would hope it to be, which can explain all of my podcasting. But, I could see, like, what I love about this, and this is a similar thing that I had with parts of Game of Thrones, toward the end, but like, what we've just read throughout this entire novel, like this entire story, just to leave it on this note that, okay, society is presumably going to return to normal. Like, we're left on this note of society returning to normalcy. And in doing that, in seeing that, I could see this being like in the future, like in the future of the storyline of this book, of the people that live on in the Stand and rebuild society and everything. Like, this story that we just read is myth. It's the myth of the new world order and everything. And it's just, I can see that being just a powerful kind of thing. Maybe that'll change the way society grows, or maybe it won't change anything and it'll just be a fun story. But, it's just something that really kind of leaves a lot to kind of, ruminate on as you think about these characters in this world.
Right.
So, we do have one final scene. The circle closes. Randall Flagg has rebranded himself Richard Faraday, I think. And he appears on an island with primitive people, like not society, like not not an advanced society, and he's up to his old tricks again.
Right.
How did you feel about this? Where did that leave you? And how did you feel about this coda to the book?
I thought it was a very Stephen King thing to do.
Yeah.
Just throw that in there. It's fun. It's I'm trying to think of something to compare it to, but yeah, it is a fun little thing.
Yeah.
I liked it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm curious because I know that Stephen King wrote a new ending or a new coda to this story. So I'm very curious what that's going to be for the miniseries. But yeah, that's it. That's the Stand. We covered it all. We were going to talk a little bit about Randall Flagg and the Dark Tower and everything, but It's late.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, so maybe we'll cover that in a future episode. We'll see. But that's The Stand. Tiny, we just reviewed The Stand.
We done did.
So to kind of close out this episode, Tiny, I sent you a screenshot that is our current top 19s. So I have The Stand at number 4. It's underneath 11/22/63, It, and Misery. And you have it at number 3, underneath The Dark Tower 7 and Misery.
Yeah.
So does this read of The Stand change that for you in any way?
I don't think it does. I think I want to leave it where it's at. I think it's. I'm very curious to when I reread Misery, because I think sticking it at number 2 was sort of a nostalgic pick, because I read it 20 years ago.
Yeah,
Misery, and so rereading Misery will be interesting to see if I want to leave it there or move it around. I have a feeling I'm going to want to move it around a little bit.
Okay.
But for now, The Stand, number 3. I'm happy with that.
Honestly, and I'm happy with it at number 4. I think it's such an epic book, and it's beautifully told, and I got so much more out of it this time than I have in previous reads of it. But I think that its placement at number 4 on my list underneath Misery, It, and 11/22/63 speaks more to the power and strength of those 3 books than it does any disadvantages or shortcomings of The Stand. So I'm comfortable with it at number 4. Of course, this is July 21st. At this point, we have probably already covered Misery. So this is probably an out-of-date list, possibly.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway. That's it for our review of The Stand. Hope you guys enjoyed these 3 episodes reviewing The Stand. Next time on the podcast, Tiny, we are going to start covering Mick Garris's 1994 Stand miniseries.
Yep.
Are you excited about this?
I don't know about excited. I haven't watched it in a long time. I just remember it being very 90s campy.
Me too. I don't know if I've seen it all the way through, so I'm very curious how I'm going to feel about it this time around. So the way that we're going to do that is this miniseries from 1994 is divided up into 4 episodes. It's available on all the digital platforms. There was just a remastered Blu-ray release that came out recently, so check that out and everything. But we're going to double up the episodes for each podcast. So next time on the podcast, we're going to cover episodes 1 and 2 of the miniseries titled The Plague and the Dreams. And then the following episode of the podcast, we're going to cover the last 2 episodes of the miniseries, The Betrayal and The Stand. So look forward to that. And any parting thoughts, Tiny, on The Stand or the podcast or what have you?
No.
All right, sweet. All right, well, thank you guys so much for listening. And once again, check us out on Patreon, patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. And hope you guys enjoyed these episodes. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.
And now, here's a short clip from our Patreon exclusive RSS feed. To hear the full clip and more exclusive Patreon content, go to patreon.com/obsessiveviewer and become a patron at the minimum rate of $1 per month. Thank you and enjoy. I hope the mics aren't picking up pizza trying to open a box of food. It's so cute because I intentionally starve her because, you know, she needs to be strong. And so she knows there's food in there and she hasn't eaten in 4 days.
Oh my God.
And it's so cute because she's like, I want food. And I'm like, no, I'm in charge. Yeah. He's
joking, guys. I just watched the cat eat.
Right. I am joking. Yes. I do not have a gun to Tiny's head. No, pizza's okay. She'll eat. She eats it. It's fine.
Yeah. I feel like we could do an episode where we talk about
Tower Junkies is edited and produced by Matt Hurt and presented by ObsessiveViewer.com. For a full archive of our episodes, go to TowerJunkiesPod.com/archive. You can also like our Facebook page at Facebook.com/TowerJunkiesPod and follow us on Twitter at TowerJunkiesPod. If you enjoy the show, please take a couple minutes to leave us a rating and a quick review on Apple Podcasts. This is the easiest way to support what we do, and all it costs is just a little bit of your time. If you'd like to donate to the podcast, you can make a PayPal donation at TowerJunkiesPod.com/donate Or support us on Patreon for recurring donations and access to commentary tracks and B-roll audio recorded exclusively for patrons at patreon.com/obsessiveviewer. Every donation goes toward paying the fees to keep the podcast running and is greatly appreciated. For official Obsessive Viewer merch, including shirts, mugs, phone cases, and more, visit our TeePublic store. You can find a link to the store in the show notes of this episode and at obsessiveviewer.com/donate. Or you can simply search for Obsessive Viewer at teepublic.com. For information about our annual live event showcasing short horror films from local filmmakers, check out shocktoberinirvington.com. And for an archive of all our events, as well as news about potential future events, head over to obsessiveviewer.com/live. For more podcast content, you can find our flagship movie and TV review and discussion show, The Obsessive Viewer Podcast, at obsessiveviewer.com and on Twitter at obsessiveviewer. You can also find Anthology, Matt's solo podcast covering The Twilight Zone, and other classic and contemporary science fiction anthology TV shows at anthologypod.com and OV Anthology Pod on Twitter. And finally, check out The Secular Perspective, Tiny's side project podcast, which tackles current events and life's big questions from the perspective of secular hosts Chad and Amanda at thesecularperspective.com. Music for the podcast is provided with permission from Fingers T on YouTube. Additional bumper music is provided courtesy of As Good As It Gets, which can be found at facebook.com/asgoodasitgetsband. Thank you so much for listening. Long days and pleasant nights.
Kitty! Can we pause for 1 second? I need to blow my nose.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny how dogs start to train, or your pets start to train you after a while.
I know, right?
Yep.
Ugh, she's so pretty, though. Look at her. Look how cute.
Yeah. Yeah, Giz has tried to get us to the point where the only way he will come inside from being outside is if we offer him a treat. And
Nice.
so we've just started like walking up to him and like cornering him and picking him up and taking him inside. Because it's like, no, you're not going to do that to us.
Aw.
Yeah.
I'm weaker than that. Okay, so...
Yeah.
I just love that kind of... that dichotomy of... or that dynamic of fear